bringing all of this back to large organizations, um, and like you said, also they've got so many more strict policies, and there's levels of senior management. How can technology help these large corporations emerge in these new times? And I think one of the really hot areas is physical versus virtual. We've got these really large uh, workforces now in a complete virtual remote workforce, and I think it's worth touching on that, and how you guys are seeing technology help organizations get back to or as close to a business as usual type scenario.
Before we converge back to the enterprise, I want to kind of like give an example of an outlier, which is, I think the enterprises will not be able to integrate it instantly, but there's so many takeaways. What's happening outside the organization. I want to mention that, and it ties very nicely. I last say, like, you kind of bring the community and ecosystem is like almost a similar thing. Like, one is more human, the other is like at the threshold to enter, and is a little bit like, oh, is it a partner or stakeholder, yada yada. But actually, like, if you look at it, they are the same thing, and you could like almost approach it that way. And it kind of ties nicely to that as well. So I'll mention very briefly a type of organization that's happening at the moment. I'll not go very much deeply into that, but there are companies who started from a decentralized organization. So they are remote first, they are technology first. So it's not, there is no local, there is no physical place. And they're called, like, maybe you have heard of the DAO. That was the DAO, which is like a decentralized funding mechanism on blockchain, on Ethereum blockchain, where and it was hacked. It was not necessarily, that was like 5 years ago. It was hacked and it kind of disappeared for some time. At the moment, it's the concept of decentralized autonomous organizations is coming back. It's almost like the Cambrian stage. You look at, like, there are so many platforms that are springing for different purposes. And what decentralized autonomous organization is, and they could like decentralize different aspects of it. It might be the funding, it might be the team forming, it might be the purpose of what we are doing. So there's different ways to decentralize. And what happens is, like, on day zero, there is nothing. On day one, there is a purpose, there is a fund, and there is a team that is formed to deliver that. And this is happening so seamlessly. Like, there are tools, there are like different startups that are forming out of it. And it's organic, it's localized, globalized, remote, it's technology first, it's decentralized first. So this is happening, and it's interesting to observe. It's not very mature, as in like an enterprise would be like, yes, let's be a DAO. It's not going to be that. But there are so many things that can be taken away. One is like kind of the purpose first. Like, if there is a purpose, how do you form a team, and how do you find funds to deliver that? And because it's very much bottom up, it's always relevant. Like, the users are also the team sometimes. Like, so people are doing what they need with the people who can do it. So definitely, like, kind of team forming, purpose, fund, those things could be implemented in the enterprise in a hybrid way. And so that's where I focus on at the moment, like all this time, like going back and like looking at and existing in DAOs, looking at their shortcomings, like privacy, security, but sometimes security is even better. Like voting systems, in the sense that, like, how do you govern an organization? Like right now, like most of the central governance is not a problem because it's very central and there's someone who says yes or no. Like, what if that doesn't exist and it's much more distributed, much more decentralized? So there is really beautiful examples, good and bad, to take from that. And to look at to the decentralized world and decentralized and autonomous organizations, I think there are a lot of things that the enterprise can learn and implement, even if it's not fully at the moment, but parts of it.
I think the stepping stone towards that is creating trust. So I work for a very traditional organisation, and there's just not just the physicality of moving people remotely, but you know, being present in the office was a prerequisite, and that to me represented low trust with the employees, because I came from quite a you know, like remote first organization previously. And so all those things that Gareth talking about can only be enabled once you've got trust with your workforce, trust with your wider stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Chris, I know you were speaking a little bit about the use of VPN.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I work in management consultancy, right? And so a large part in normal times of our business is finding efficiency, often in processes, technology for sure, sometimes in people, right? And so I think, you know, at this time where, you know, large corporations who may have had, you know, 1 day work from home kind of policy or whatever, work from home whenever you need to in some cases, suddenly everyone is working from home simultaneously. And I don't know if you've noticed, but the morning virtual meeting on WebEx at 9 o'clock is almost impossible to get onto. VPNs, you know, there are only so many termination points. There's only so much bandwidth. And so I think a lot of companies have looked at that. And I think, you know, small cottage industries have sprung up around, you know, how do we help businesses and clients expand the use of technology for remote work. These aren't new concepts. I think the depth and the breadth of the use of these things, and by the way, the longevity, right? It's one thing to use a VPN for a meeting and then you disconnect, or maybe you're at home for 1 day. You are now at home continuously for many, many weeks. You know, what does that do to an infrastructure, to a network ecosystem, right? And I think, you know, especially managing endpoints, you think about the capabilities that most companies have built up capabilities to manage endpoints over the past decade or two, specifically around, you know, bring your own device and all of these other things. And I think now they are really exercising those capabilities, right? And I think, you know, I've encountered a number of times some failures in the underlying infrastructure and broadness of support for enabling that endpoint control. I think the other piece of this is like, you know, all of that's well and good, right? All the technology, all the tools, all the gizmos, wonderful, wonderful stuff. But at the end of the day, as Sally said, if you don't trust your employees, you're going to have a difficulty, right? There is an app. I probably shouldn't tell this to people watching a podcast sponsored by Tanium, but there is an app that will just move your cursor around and keep your status green so that people think you're actually working all day. So you should go out and look for that. But I mean, there's those sorts of things, right? And so as a consultant working for big clients, you know, typically we would look at this and say, how can we leverage the metrics coming off of the VPN, right, to ascertain productivity? And this is not hypothetical. This is happening right now, which is if I need to make cuts, I need to make a 20% cut in my operating expense. Well, where am I going to look first? Unfortunately, right? Projects going to freeze, going to cut discretionary spend. But I've got all of these people now and I have less work, I have less demand, and I have all this capacity. So I'm going to have to do something with those people. And so how do you make those decisions? Well, you need data to make those decisions. And one thing that management consultants are really good at is getting data to help you make those decisions. Some of that data is going to come from things like, how long was Chris connected to the VPN today? How many documents did he alter in Microsoft Teams? You know, I don't know, whatever. How many Zoom meetings did he host? You know, et cetera.
Yeah, let me jump on that one, because I think this speaks to what I was talking about earlier about the kind of castle and moat. And I think the days of, you know, phoning back to the corporate network via the VPN, surely this is going to be the crunch point for VPN as a technology, where a lot of organizations go, yeah, VPN for mass remote working just doesn't work. So we'll start to look at things like zero trust and other approaches to doing that. And yeah, exactly your point on endpoint control. I mean, of course, I'm going to want to jump in on this topic, given what Tanium does. But, you know, the folks that have relied on sort of, you know, systems that work beautifully fine in BAU times when most people are in the office are now really struggling, because, you know, if you need to patch, you know, hundreds of thousands of machines with a 500 to say gigabyte file with a patch, you know, every patch Tuesday, you start to do the maths. That's just going to destroy any large network, let alone, you know, let alone a VPN that's already creaking with business traffic. So I've talked a little bit about this before, that we're helping customers at the moment with splitting off that kind of security traffic and management traffic from the VPN. So if your VPN is the only way to phone home and do business critical applications, that traffic can be moved away from that contended connection. But also kind of managing and knowing what you have, and the whole point about trust as well. Being able perhaps to set different policies based on different devices or different endpoint types. If it's a corporately managed device that you've got all the policies and everything on, great. You're happy to kind of allow certain access as per sort of zero trust kind of principles. But if you don't know that device, then maybe you'll only give it a more restrictive kind of level of access. So all these sorts of things, I think, are really challenging most organizations that still, even though the world has moved on from castle and moat, as in on-prem technology, they're still kind of reverse tromboning or hairpinning back everything back through the on-prem world, which in a world of cloud first and mass internet kind of applications, SaaS applications, it doesn't make any sense anymore. I think this probably will be the moment where people go, these sort of incidents or ongoing issues like this are the reason why that architecture is just should have been thrown away a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad you used the word architecture, but before I do want to ask, is there a Tanium endpoint on your gigantic printer in the background?
No, but Tanium can see things like printers because they're connected to the network. But yeah, no.
Anyway. The word architecture. I mean, I think this is a really critical point, right? Which is, I think this is revealing in some areas is it almost didn't matter whether it was on-prem or off-prem. What mattered was, are you owning the capability to do something that maybe you don't have a competency in and you really don't need to do, right? And so like endpoint control, right? Perhaps, I mean, I don't, maybe there are new business models here, Oliver, but is there an opportunity for some companies to say, you know what, this is really difficult to do with 10,000 employees all sitting at home. We don't have a competency here. We were able to get by when everyone was in the office, but we just don't want to do this anymore. Please, somebody come in and do this for us so we can focus on the things that make us the company that we are, as opposed to, as opposed to like, monitoring and patching and all of these things that historically companies would have done in their IT area. That it's just like, why are we doing this? We're a credit card company. Like, why are we handling VPN security? Why are we doing all of this stuff? Let's just allow Google to do that for us, or Amazon, or whomever, and focus on the differentiating capabilities that make us, that's our secret sauce, right? And let's focus on our strengths and not worry about all this other stuff.
That's core, isn't it? So the ecosystem conversation is recognizing what part you play in the ecosystem and where you can leverage others who are specialists in their field.
Yeah, you can. That's exactly the thought to Chris's point. Like, turn that on its head. You can, if you're making those decisions from an IT perspective, can you make similar choices when you're creating new services for your customers? So, what other people can you work with to create new value that you can both share in? And the word control always jars with me. I don't think you need control as long as there's shared and mutual benefit.
I totally resonate with that. So it's great you bring that up, Chris. Like, it made me realize some of the way of quantifying in the old world does really not work. And sometimes changing the architecture or changing how we approach, we mentioned time. Maybe in the decentralized world, no one cares about your time. It's the outcome, what you're delivering, the KPI. And then there are things around remuneration in a decentralized way, yada yada, which becomes, it's a whole mind-blowing aspect. But there are things that can be taken away where it's not about time slots anymore. It's more granular in the sense that what value you're giving to this project. And I can see it couldn't work in 10,000 scale, but if you kind of decentralize the purpose and decentralize the teams, then it's much more manageable. And decentralized doesn't mean it's small scale, by the way. This higher example that I've given in China is a conglomerate. It's just they are a decentralized organization where the balance sheet is one.
Yeah, I think teams focusing on the value, even identifying the value, it's something that I talk about all the time. What are the success factors of the work? And I must admit, for BAU teams, that's really challenging for them to stop and think, oh, why am I doing this? And then it gets really scary when you start putting numbers around it, like if I don't achieve this, then they think, oh, what happens? It's almost better to be not aware and keep doing what you're doing.
It's the kind of ostrich effect, isn't it? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just going to bury my head in the sand, carry on doing these TPS reports, even though I know no one reads them. But it's the process, so we must follow the process.
Yeah.
Can I I'll just jump. Like I was thinking, I love that you said ostrich, and like that, Sally, like that problem. Like I think it's very human, and like whatever you do, you'll have it. Like unpredictable is so scary, and maybe like we don't jump because of that, and that's fine. Like we are just human. We are not like yeah, it's okay. I think like I was thinking like the approaches that we could take at the moment. Like ostrich is one, and I thought like the other would be a cheetah, where you're like just sprinting all the time, and like because you're too fast, like you're not caught. Like maybe it's not necessarily very human as well, but I thought like maybe it's a turtle. Like you have your safety, but once you can move, you move, and then you kind of like go in as well. So it's safer. Maybe it's slower, but it's also you are progressing instead of like just being there, like your head in the sand. So maybe like between ostrich, turtle, and cheetah, like maybe we should just like take a turtle approach.
I feel like there's a whole blog article here. It feels like organizations as different animal types.
Which archetype are you?
I sense Ryan's going to rein us in now.
No, I'm loving it. I'm already thinking about images of turtles that I can get. So I think, I mean, think about the organisations that are keeping their head in the sand, let's say, and just doing the same things and doing things like VPN over control. And I don't want to go too far down into this because I know this could be a whole conversation on its own, but what's the real ethical upshot, do you think, of this? You know, now that people are in these remote workforces, how far is too far? I mean, organizations, they have to drive efficiency to survive, but when is it keeping us safe versus being a little
it's a bit like what Petra was saying, that leaders need to be human first, right? And because the reality is, as Chris said, you can measure everyone's metrics, but the reality is you're not taking the context into the equation, which is, you know, you've got employees now with 2 kids running around or 3 kids running around at home who expect to be either entertained or homeschooled, you know, and so if you're then looking at how much their mouse is moving, well, that's not a very fair metric. They may still be very productive, they may still be getting their work done, but they can't be sat at their desk, you know, during office hours. Maybe they log on the evening or what have you, or they end up scribbling stuff down on a bit of paper because that's the way they can work whilst keeping an eye on the children. So, you know, and I'm sure there were certain people who need to go and shop at a time that's quieter or whatever, you know. So I think trying to measure things, you know, it's like you say, but doing the same things, but also measuring the same things and expecting the same sort of output and outcomes is, I think, quite dangerous. And going back to Sally's point about 15 years of marketing, many organizations are going to make decisions now that are going to be with them for the next decade, because they'll either get, you know, a reputation as being too hard-nosed and too sort of business focused when a time when they should be more human focused, or perhaps they do brilliant things for the community, and they're not just tokenism, you know, they're not just sort of trying to create good PR, they're genuinely, you know, looking out for their communities and looking out for their people and their customers. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time to see how, you know, depending on how much longer this goes on for, how organizations respond. And I personally believe one of the reasons I was really keen to do this, I think we will see ecosystems emerging. We will see new ways of operating forming, because that's just going to have to be the way it is, you know, in order for things to continue operating. I just think things can't stay the same.
I think there's you know, a new dynamic with the relationship between an employee and employer. I think those employers who have responded in certain ways to ensure people's lives are protected first, rather than the output or the outcomes or the metrics in the short and immediate term, will create trust and loyalty with their workforce. Those ones that have taken a pure traditional approach around metrics, numbers, you know, may survive in the short term, but as social mobility is inevitable, people are realizing they can work from anywhere in the world once we're allowed out of our houses. You know, they may want to work for decentralized organizations on a beach in Malaysia because people have discovered they can. And if traditional organisations can't provide that work, then they may lose talent. So interesting societal changes, how they might affect their business in the future.
I was just going to say, I think there's a bit of creative destruction at work here also, right? I think some of these changes would not have happened if they weren't forced. And if you look back 20 years to, the end of the first internet bubble and the changes that were going through businesses at that point in time that we are still living with, things such as the collapse of the travel industry, right? And you see, obviously, no one calls a travel agent anymore. You go on whatever website and you book your flight or whatever it is. And I think, there's going to be new relationships between retailers and customers, retailers and suppliers, logistics. I think logistics is probably going to undergo maybe huge transformation. Even to the point Amazon, I saw has disabled some of the recommendation engine capability on their website that recommends stuff to you, in part because they don't want people buying more stuff right now. They just can't. They cannot ship it, right? And that's why you see delivery times in the 2-month range. I just ordered a book. It'll be here in June, right? And it's like, what is going on, right? I think so. I think there's going to be all sorts of new relationships, and out of that comes new opportunities. My company has sort of virtual happy hours via Zoom. We've used Zoom for years, and it's fantastic. A plug for Zoom. But we do these virtual happy hours, and one of the things that we've started doing is using a new tool that was just developed in the past month or so, in response to the fact that bars are closed, and as a result, the companies that make the little quiz games and trivia games in the bars needed a new model, and that new model was to integrate their capabilities in a new way into video conferences, WebEx, Zoom, etc. And so we were able to basically have the same type of functionality as if we were all doing the quiz trivia at the bar. Instead, it was via Zoom, which seems obvious, right? But you'd be surprised. There were very few options for that in the marketplace. So I think that's an example of some new relationships that are emerging out of this.
I think that opens an interesting question of like the future of customer experience. I know the brand that I work in is passionate about customer experience, but at the moment that's delivered via call center and a little bit on their webpage. Like, what does customer experience mean in a virtual setting? Are we all with headsets on in a bar?
I think like definitely I was thinking our response to this time and like really resonate with some of the stuff that we do and that we habitually take right now will prevail afterwards, because they are not necessarily only for this time. And we mentioned that like some companies like GE were trying to inflict the crisis situation to see like how they can adapt, the adaptability, decentralization. Definitely agree. Like, I think these are, in whatever the scenario, like if we were doing scenario-based planning, they will be useful and relevant afterward in many scenarios at the same time.
For the things that will stick afterwards versus the things that will go, because clearly I like quoting Petra because obviously she comes up with some good statements. One other thing I remember saying is, we're social beings, and so some of the things that we're tolerating right now will clearly disappear, but there will be other things which I'm sure will stay, like people online shopping. People, perhaps my parents, for example, in their 60s, haven't really done online shopping before because they didn't have to, whereas now they're doing it all the time, and actually now they know how to do it, they'll probably continue to use that service. So certain kind of online channels, I think, will certainly continue to have an uptick afterwards, but perhaps some of the other more creative, Zoom happy hour, we've been pretty safe that won't probably be sticking around as much as it has. But
actually, I have an interjection here, Oliver. There is a very good example of this. One of my colleagues and friends that I do my own podcast with runs a series of networking events, and they happen to be during the week, right? And as a result, most people like myself that are consultants that travel cannot attend those events during the week. And he hosts them in many different cities across the US. And, I've been to a few in the local area, but I haven't been to all of the others. Well, guess what, right? Over the past month, they've all been hosted on Zoom. And I have been exposed to whole new groups of people, new networks, new ecosystems, if you will. And I think it's actually fantastic, and I hope he continues it. I think this idea of maybe, book club via Zoom, or we're having a birthday party today for my 6-year-old daughter via Zoom. And we're going to pipe in the giraffe from the local zoo, right? This sort of stuff that wasn't possible before. Yeah, it's not going to be, commonplace, or everyone's not going to do it. But I think there are some of these things that may actually stick around that might be surprising.
Do you know what? You're right. I think the almost kind of mainstreamization, if that's a word, which I know it isn't, of video calling, I think is one of the other things that we can say will with fair certainty will come out off the back of this. So yeah, particularly a large country like the States, Anyway.
My in-laws are in their 80s, and we're going to do the grand experiment today of bringing them in via Zoom.
Oh, good luck.
Good luck, yeah.
I think there's a new hashtag here, like the future of interaction.
So I was looking at a survey. I think it was Go UK or YouGov who did that, and they asked people whether they want to go back. Only 9% says they want to go back. So that is, I think that's like, this is within UK. I think that's a very good measure, very good result that people don't necessarily want to go back. There is some stuff that we are doing, and it was only possible because all of a sudden everything was very precarious, very changing. So people tried new things, and some of them they like. And isn't it great that you could, if you had this idea, or as an enterprise, if there was something that you wanted to try but you were not sure, isn't it a great time to just test it right now? Not necessarily to be sharky and more customer and more sales, but can I deliver value in a better way, which I wasn't doing before? So it's a great time right now because people are saying yeah, we don't want to go back. And
the thing is, even when lockdown's lifted, if there's still a health scare for people, and also people have lost incomes and lost disposable income, then behavior is going to be changed there anyways. I know my wife is very nervous about even going to the supermarket right now, and that's not going to change when lockdown gets lifted, if it's still prevalent, if the health risk is still there. So so I think this unfortunate impact of agoraphobia will persist longer than the kind of government restrictions, I'm sure, for a many individuals.
Yeah.
I plan to use that excuse of not going to the grocery store for fear of getting coronavirus, so I don't have to go get groceries.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it means that I have to do it, but anyway, it's all good.
Yeah, there's definitely the mental health aspect of it. We are going through it right now. We don't know how we're going to come out, but definitely one of the emergence is also in the mental health and decentralization of it in a sense that it can be served to people in a more whether they're in their homes, whether it's more proactive. Mental health, it's good that you mentioned that, Oliver. One of the things that probably will need to stay and is emerging right now is the mental health and how we are providing it, counseling and being there, the community aspect where we can help people who come out maybe who are going through this and might not come out as pristine as we were before. That definitely would stay, I think.
We actually traversed really nicely there into the second part of the title question of why now? Why are we focusing so heavily on this now? And Guy, to your point with the research, that the new normal after lockdown, after the pandemic has died down, is nobody wants to go back to the state we were in before. And I think there are lots of positives to take out of that, and I think we've shared a lot of them there. And I just wonder whether, just to bring it back to the enterprise again, how do you think with large organizations, what really big culture shifts do you think there will be within the biggest organizations?
Well, I would cultural shift. It depends on what they do, right? Whether they are the ostrich or the turtle or the cheetah at the moment, whichever archetype they kind of blend into. So I can't really answer that question directly, Ryan, but what I think they should do if they are not doing, is definitely look at those ecosystems, whether maybe they haven't really looked at that. They have it, but they haven't looked at that. And look at the opportunities around decentralization. If you have something that's stagnant and is suffering because of A or B, look at like whether there are other ways to do it. And decentralization is relevant right now because that is the thing that makes it relevant, adaptable, resilient.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say there's a fair amount of unpredictability, right? And therefore, and making predictions is always dangerous. But there's some things you can kind of look at, and I think we've touched on some already. Like people will get used to the fact that they're not commuting. Like my next door neighbor normally commutes like 2 hours each way in the car, and she's loving the fact she's not doing that right now. And I'm sure she'll be looking at ways to reduce her commute after this all lifts. And I'm sure there'll be many people kind of questioning and talking to their managers about, do I really need to be in the office as much as I was before? And a lot of this, of course, applies to knowledge workers, and it will be different in perhaps manufacturing and other industries. But yeah, no, I think there are a few things that we can, we've kind of talked about, video being more normalized. The number of conference calls now where people actually switch on video in work is far higher. I think that I quote that anecdotally, but I'm sure others are seeing this as well, because video is being normalized. And from a technology perspective, some bits of technical architecture people are going to look at and go, well, we know that doesn't work under scale. We're going to have to change that bit of tech. Be that the VPN, be that your e-commerce platform, be that whatever it is that's creaking right now. So there are a few things that we can kind of look at. But Guy is right. It depends on your culture and how you're approaching this situation already.
Mm-hmm.
I think enterprises could look more, I'm afraid it is a trend, but that beyond profit, and make decisions not just on the bottom line, but is that right for their customers? Is that right for their local communities? Is that right for their wider stakeholders, be it supply chain ecosystems, and collaborate on decision making to make those difficult choices in the moment. And I think that will then inform culture. You either take your internal culture and then share that with the wider, or if your culture was very much a presence one and one based on process, use the outside world to inform your culture. And I'm definitely seeing different sides of my colleagues through house party and goodness knows what else we're all up to.
My final thought on this, or to bring it back to where we started, I mean, I think you look at these times, I think this is an opportunity. This is a period of time of dramatic change and upheaval, and there is an opportunity here to adjust, right? There is an opportunity for some transformation. And so if you have, an ecosystem that is fragile, and this event, this crisis has revealed the fragility of that ecosystem, right? Now is the time to transform the bits that are fragile, and maybe, as I said earlier, not do some things, do some other things instead, and reorient your ecosystem to work in the 2020s and beyond, instead of building for 2002, right? That sort of thing. I think the flip side of that is, if you have an ecosystem that is too rigid, that has prevented you from doing something or responding or pivoting, now's an opportunity to change that, because I'm guessing there will be more events like this in the future, and if not a health crisis, quite possibly more financial crises, or
a climate crisis,
other disasters, other crises. And I don't think the old model of, we have the business continuity plan in Microsoft Word, it's on the SharePoint, we're good guys. When was the last time anyone restored that backup and into production, right? And ran off of backed up data, right? Those sorts of things. I think that concept of disaster recovery and business continuity, I think that's kind of like over. I think there's a new thinking here built around ecosystems that, we've got suppliers, we've got producers, we've got customers, all of these different stakeholders, and they need to be working in a more flexible, joint way, or we're not going to survive. And I think, the example I gave earlier of the pork producers, right? I think that's an example of where that has broken, right? That process that was built for just in time pig to market, or I'm making that up. I don't know if the pig
sandwich.
Yes, exactly. Oh, actually, I do know there's I live in the southeast of the United States, and there are a lot of chicken farms, right? And so often back in the days when I would drive my children to school, pre-COVID, on the highway there would always be chicken trucks full of chickens, right, going to the chicken processing facility, and so we're always watching for the chickens. Well, there are no more chicken trucks going right now. In part because the logistics system is under strain. And so I think, that's a real tangible, that's your food supply, right? That gets really real, right? And so I think this is the time where some of these fragile systems, or brittle maybe is the right word, right, are going to have to undergo some transformation to survive.
I love the examples. I'm just gonna want to say one more thing, because we talk about positive emergence, like when it's decentralized, you kind of enable the emergence and good things arise, the relevant things arise. I'm also seeing I don't want to kind of go to the negative, but when there is emergence, there is dark emergence as well, such that we at the moment, we are getting the signals of surveillance, even, or tracking and control, those kind of measures could be pushed and we might not really realize. So maybe one thing to note as well, emergence, great, and it's very hard once it's organic and you can't really measure and control everything. But if we see dark emergence, surveillance economy, tracking, kind of all the stuff because of immunity licenses and blah blah, all this stuff could lead to horrible emerging and sticking things as well. So probably to watch out for these ones as well in this kind of fragile and ever-changing environment. And I hear more and more, and I got a little bit scared of
I think what I'd love is us to learn from the political situation coming out of Cambridge Analytica, and not to get too on my soapbox about that, but we walked into that situation. I hope we can have a better public discourse around ethics and data and privacy, because there's an immediate need for people to have contact tracing, and there's amazing collaboration going on with Apple and Google and within governments. But what does that mean for the long term? Yes, of course, it's paramount now. But can we have an informed public debate about it?
Yeah. There's a bunch more things, and I know we're timing out, but there's a bunch more things I'd love to talk about. But it's feeling to me like maybe the next topic is regulation and control sort of theme, perhaps.
Maybe dark emergence and what's happening at the moment.
And I know, I think I mentioned to some of you before that I really want to do something around, that's sort of a bit Black Mirror-esque, inspired by where technology could go wrong. So we'll have to try not to make it a really dark next episode of Architect tomorrow, but I'm sure Ryan will make sure it isn't. But anyway, I'll pass back to Ryan to close us off.
Thanks. I mean, really good final thoughts there. Erring a little bit on the side of the negative, but no, I'm joking. But it was a fantastic conversation, and if you really enjoyed this, please do put some comments in, ask us some questions, and we'll get back to you. And also, as Oliver mentioned there, we're always trying to think of new topics to discuss. So if there's anything that you would like us to discuss or come on in and discuss yourself, please just enter into the comment box, and we'll get back to you. The other thing just to mention is that we are actually going to do an Architect Tomorrow live roundtable on May the 28th. So we're going to have a group of panelists on that one, and we're going to discuss some of the most pressing issues that we've seen so far in the Architect Tomorrow series, and allow you to ask your questions and try it live and get on with that. So with that, thanks very much everybody for joining and discussing today. It was a great session, and unless anyone's got anything else to say, we can say goodbye.
Great to hear from you all.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Take care.
Great stuff. Thanks.
Bye.